No, hello. Okay, hi guys. As promised, I wanted to do a little chat about Ken Clarke. So basically, through looking at the charts, Ken Clarke and Joe Swinson are going to be absolutely key in this Remain kind of spearhead coalescence force to try and stop Brexit. Now, David Noakes, who was one of the very early campaigners against the EU and has a very extensive website against the EU, he identified some key figures. He said it was David Cameron, Mendelsohn, Tony Blair, Ed Balls, they were all, and Ken Clarke, and he said they were all Bilderbergers, and they were heavily involved in the EU project and could potentially be a problem. So Ken Clarke, is he a Bilderberger, or is it a conspiracy theory? Well, I managed to find this article in the Telegraph, so I'd just like to read it to you. It says Bilderberg. Ken Clarke forgot he was a trustee of funding group. Kenneth Clarke has admitted that he may have failed to fully declare his role organising the secret meetings of the Bilderberg group of world leaders. The senior minister without a portfolio is one of 3 trustees of the Bilderberg Association, the organisation that funded a conference last week. They're referring to the big conference they had at the Grove in Watford a couple of years ago. Mr. Clarke told the Commons, that's the Bilderberg conference in Watford, Mr. Clarke told the Commons that he had forgotten that the controversial gatherings were paid for from funds raised by the group, a group of which he's a trustee, and he just kind of, he just sort of forgot that. Hey, the guy's so busy, you can't expect him to remember these little details, He said he was checking his records to see whether he had informed civil servants of his role, and as he would, of course, be expected to avoid potential conflicts of interests. Mr. Clarke made the disclosure while answering questions over the private meeting of 140 of the world's most powerful executives, politicians, ministers, and advisors, which took place at a hotel near Watford last week. The minister, who has been a member of the Bilderberg Group steering committee for 10 years, attended the annual event along with David Cameron, George Gideon Osborne, who of course has been very vocal in talking against Brexit again, Ed Balls, and Lord Mendelsohn. Have they not been the key players in just taking us further and further into that project? And right, so that was what I wanted to talk about. So obviously you can see there, Ken Clarke's been waiting in the wings, been fairly quiet, but he's always been a key member of this Bilderberg group. So we know now he's well connected. Now, you asked me in my previous vlog about, the Illuminati doesn't exist. Well, here we have evidence, 140 of the world's most powerful executives, politicians, ministers, blah, 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 all meeting. Well, what are they all meeting for? Why bother? They're meeting obviously in order to collude and to further their interests. And obviously one of their big interests are things like the EU. So yes, expect Ken Clarke to emerge. Now, what I looked at in Ken Clarke's chart, he's born in 1940. He's a Cancerian. He has a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Taurus. This guy has a lot of money sitting somewhere. He was probably also born into money. That particular conjunction, when solar arced, is now absolutely conjunct his Mars-Pluto conjunction, which straddles the 1st degree of Leo. Mars is just a little bit into Cancer. Pluto is into Leo. That shows me that his extreme hunger for power and ability to control and influence events is reaching its peak. It also says to me that there's an awful lot of funding behind him. He's the front man. He's the obvious power, but behind him is an enormous amount of financial power, possibly banks. Saturn-Pluto, Saturn-Jupiter conjunction Taurus definitely says to me banks. So there's an enormous weight behind Ken Clarke, and that's why he's going to be thrust forward. The weight is not behind Jeremy Corbyn. He's got a lot of Neptune in his chart. He's like heading off to obscurity. So it's really Ken Clarke's going to be the main man, kind of thing. This also cropped up. It was very interesting. There's a gentleman called Benjamin Fellows. He's now 40 years old. He was accused of perverting the course of justice when he claimed that Ken Clarke touched his private parts when he was a teenager. Fellows used to be an actor. He was a former child star, and he says this incident that happened with Ken Clarke occurred in 1994. Now, Mr. Clarke was charged with perverting the course of justice. Just last week, he was acquitted, and he was found not guilty of making false claims against Mr. Clarke. So if he's not guilty of making false claims, then it seems illogical to suggest that his claims must have had some credence. And why aren't we hearing about it? I mean, I remember when Fallon resigned, the Minister of Defence, just because it came out he touched Julia Hartley-Brewer's knee. And you know, Julia Hartley-Brewer, she's no feminist. She wasn't particularly, well, she's not a radical feminist anyway. She wasn't even worried about it. And he had to resign just from the mere embarrassment of getting a little bit drunk and touching her knee. People have fallen for much less than this. This seems to me a serious allegation, which when tested in a court of law is found to have veracity, right? So why is it not reported? Apparently the Telegraph did actually report that Ben Fellows was found not guilty of making false claims about Ken Clarke in terms of sexual abuse. This was reported in the Telegraph the other Friday, but it was not done by one of their staff reporters. It was done by an agency reporter, and it was kind of tucked away very, very, very quietly. They don't want to make any noise at all about these allegations against Ken Clarke. They do not want him tainted. He's their man. He's far too important. Do you see now what justice is about? Justice is not about who's innocent or who's guilty. That's irrelevant. It's about who matters, who's powerful and who's not powerful. People who are powerful and who matter will not be found guilty because that's not convenient. People who are not powerful and who don't matter, who are not important cog in the globalist wheel, well, whether they found guilty or not is of no one's real concern. But as you can see, justice is just going to take a little holiday when it comes to these particular allegations, as are all the journalists. So anyway, just a little bit of background there, and to mention the whole Bilderberger connection. I thought it would be quite interesting on Ken Clarke, but I do see him coming forward and basically throwing his political weight around. He will emerge as a player. Lobby Doster says, bankers rule the world, politicians are bought or blackmailed. It's very easy. You know, everyone has their price, like they say. And people who go into politics are generally very ambitious and want power. And power corrupts. And power is an absolute drug for people. It's obvious. People will work crazy hours and do almost anything for power. So it's easy. And also, you know, everyone has a skeleton. Well, not okay, most people. Ordinary people probably don't. But most people have a skeleton in their closet, and that can always be used against them to blackmail them. But, you know, when it comes to power or money, it's almost unlimited what people can do. You can never underestimate people when it comes to power. And Ken Clarke, he may be sort of doing his last stint as an MP, but you never know. Okay, he's certainly going to make his last stint, make the last one a good one, should I say that? Okay, thanks, guys.